Okay, so we're going to take this opportunity to go over Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, which was a document that he wrote in order to try to explain what the post-war world should look like, what the world should look like after the end of World War I. So, in order to understand this document, we need to go back to the beginning of the unit. We need to remember why World War I broke out in the first place. And I'm just going to quickly review. There were four main reasons that we talked about. The first was militarism. European countries were expanding their militaries, and this was increasing all sorts of tensions between them. The second was alliances. In many cases, those alliances were secret, and that increased tensions as well. The third was imperialism. These European countries were competing over colonies, and this competition certainly aided to create tensions. And the fourth was nationalism. Increased pride in European countries added to feelings of competition, feelings of tension. So an easy way to remember these is the acronym MAIN, M-A-I-N, militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. So what Wilson does is he says, well, in our post-war world, the post-war peace needs to address all four of these things. And as we read this document, we're going to look for areas where he references either militarism, alliances, imperialism, or nationalism. So his first paragraph, let's take a look at that. He says, "It will be our wish and purpose that the processes of peace, when they are begun, shall be absolutely open, and that they involve and permit henceforth no secret understandings of any kind. This day of conquest, the day of conquest and aggrandizement is gone by. So is also the day of secret covenants, entered into in the interest of particular governments, and likely at some unlooked-for moment to upset the peace of the world. It is this happy fact, now clear to the view of every public man, whose thoughts do not still linger in an age that is dead and gone, which makes it possible for every nation whose purposes are consistent with justice and the peace of the world to avow, nor or at any other time, the objects it has in view." So that's kind of a wordy way to open, but let's take a look at some key phrases here. He says, "The processes of peace shall be absolutely open. They shall involve and permit no secret understandings of any kind." Secret understandings. Key here connects back to the idea of alliances, right? The alliances aren't going to be secret. We're going to be open. We're not going to be creating these secret agreements. So he's clearly referencing alliances in this first section. He's basically saying, ultimately, if you think about the whole thing, that these four reasons, those are the things of the past. Right? The age of those four issues is dead and gone. And now we need to look forward and not to look back. Now, I'm going to skip this next paragraph and let's just move down and take a look at these Roman numerals here. Basically what Wilson does is he sets up a program in which he says there are 14 different conditions that need to occur to prevent these reasons for war from happening again. And we're going to go through these one at a time. First he says, open covenants of peace, openly arrived at, after which there shall be no private international understandings of any kind, but diplomacy shall proceed frankly and in the public view. So that's kind of a rehash or a repetition of what we just talked about. And once again, he's talking about no secret alliances. We need to be open. We need to make sure we're not talking behind one another's backs. And that's going to create an environment where peace is more likely. He goes on to say there should be absolute freedom of navigation upon the seas, outside territorial waters, alike in peace and in war, except as seas may be closed in whole or in part by international action for the enforcement of international covenants. So one of the issues that was going on before and during the war, there were tensions about where shipping could occur, and during the war you had neutral shipping being shot down by submarines. So basically Wilson is trying to emphasize the fact that navigation should be completely free for all countries involved. He says there should be the removal, so far as possible, of all economic barriers and establishment of equality of trade conditions among all the nations consenting to the peace and associating themselves for its maintenance. So one way we could look at this is we could talk about the issue of nationalism. Right? Nationalism is pride in one's country. And if you're concerned about increasing your country's position as opposed to others, then perhaps you'll set up tariffs or you'll set up trade conditions that are favorable to you and not to others. And that's really about competition. And here Wilson is saying we all need to have equal trade conditions. We shouldn't be fighting against one another. He says in number 4, there should be adequate guarantees given and taken that national armaments will be reduced to the lowest point consistent with domestic safety. Key here is the word armaments. Okay, we're talking about the issue of militarism and the fact that our militaries do not need to be as big as they have been in the past. So we can see he's consistently referring back to those 4 main ideas. Number 5, a free, open-minded, and absolutely impartial adjustment of colonial claims. Colonial claims, that's a key word, colonies, a reference to the ideas of imperialism. This adjustment of colonial claims should be based upon a strict observance of the principle that in determining all such questions of sovereignty, sovereignty meaning who's in charge, the issues of sovereignty meaning who's in power, who's in charge, the interests of the populations concerned must have equal weight with the equitable claims of the government whose title it is to be determined. That's just a fancy way of saying, the people who live in a place should determine who's in charge of that place. So that's about imperialism. Let's take a look at our imperial claims and let's reassess whether we need to have colonies or not. That's basically what Wilson is saying. Now, if we look through 6 through 13, we're not going to go through each of those one at a time, but we'll take one as an example because they all have a similar theme. Let's take a look at number 9. It says here in number 9, it says, a readjustment of the frontiers of Italy should be effected along clearly recognizable lines of nationality. Clearly recognizable lines of nationality. If we look at the word nationality, that should key us in to the issue of nationalism and the fact that one of the reasons World War I, is the fact that, many of the borders in Europe were not correctly drawn. You had different groups of people put together in the same nation, or you had parts of nations that wanted to be independent because they felt that they had different nationalities, meaning different languages, different cultures. Remember, this is one of the things that caused the war to break out with the desire for independence of Bosnia from Austria-Hungary, okay? And if we look at number 10, we see a reference to that as well with the peoples of Austria-Hungary. Remember, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by a Bosnian nationalist. So all of these here is talking about redrawing the lines of Europe so that they are along national borders. And so really, 6 through 13 is all about nationalism. And so that is an important key here. And that's a big part of the 14 points. Let's take a look at the map and let's reassess things. And then finally, if we look at number 14, it says, a general association of nations must be formed under specific covenants or agreements for the purpose of affording mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike. This is referring to something that became known as the League of Nations. And the United States never ended up joining the League of Nations, but Wilson's idea was create an organization where we can communicate, we can cooperate, we can get along. And in many ways, the League of Nations is designed to address all of the issues, a place where people can communicate about militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Finally, let's take a look at this last paragraph, because it's really important. What Wilson says is, for such arrangements and covenants we are willing to fight and continue to fight until they are achieved, but only because we wish the right to prevail and desire a just and stable peace, as such can be secured only by removing the chief provocations of war, which this program does remove. We have no jealousy of German greatness, and there is nothing in this program that impairs it. We grudge her no achievement or distinction of learning or of pacific enterprise such as have made her record very bright and very enviable. We do not wish to injure her or to block in any way her legitimate influence or power. We do not wish to fight her either with arms or with hostile arrangements of trade if she is willing to associate herself with us and the other peace-loving nations of the world in covenants of justice and law and fair dealing. We wish her only to accept a place of equality among the peoples of the world, the new world in which we now live, instead of a place of mastery. So here he's really extending an olive branch. He's saying we should not punish Germany. Whether what Wilson wants to occur here in the 14 points actually occurs is one of the things that we need to take a look at. When the Treaty of Versailles is written, we need to ask ourselves, does Wilson's vision that he expresses here in his 14 points come to fruition? If so, where? And if not, where not? Because some parts of it, he is going to get what he wants, and in other parts of it, maybe he won't.